It's the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and that the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today, strikes, the first day of strike action this week, also by-election look ahead and press freedom. It's all to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Cabinet will meet today as the first of 3 national rail strikes causes major travel disruption across the UK. 80% of train services have been cancelled and stations will only be open until 6:30 this evening. The National Rail Inquiry's website has crashed as commuters try to find out which trains are running. More walkouts are planned for Thursday and Saturday, but the knock-on effects will be felt all week. Former train dispatcher Stephen Bennett says his ex-colleagues need a proper pay rise.
Something's got to give. Like, people can't get by. I was speaking to a friend who's still working for Network Rail yesterday, and he's had to move back home with his parents in Sheffield because he can't continue to live here on his own. It's just not sustainable. So I don't think people are asking for much. They're asking to be paid a fair wage for the work they put in.
Unions have reacted with fury over a leaked memo which suggests Labour has banned its frontbenchers from picket lines. The head of the TSSA union described it as ridiculous nonsense by a party that was created by trade unions. Labour has declined to comment, although some MPs have joined demonstrations. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, didn't deny the claim.
I wasn't going to go to one anyway, to be honest, because what I want to see is a negotiated end to this dispute as quickly as possible, because this is obviously causing enormous inconvenience to the public today who need the railways for all sorts of reasons, work and many other reasons, and the sooner this comes to an end, the better.
The Duke of Cambridge has signalled the future direction of the monarchy in photos released to mark his 40th birthday. Prince William is pictured with big issue seller Dave Martin, who showed him the ropes in the capital earlier this month. The Duke says he wants to continue highlighting the solvable issue of homelessness and plans to involve his children, just as his mother did with him. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to The Briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, tomorrow, voters will head to the polls in opposite ends of the country. Or even on Thursday, I should say. By-elections have been called in Wakefield and Tiverton after their previous representatives, both Conservatives, were forced to step down due to scandals of a sexual nature. In Wakefield, the former Conservative MP Imran Ahmed Khan stood down after being convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy in 2008. He was jailed for 18 months. And down in Tiverton and Honiton, former Tory MP Neil Parish resigned after admitting he had watched pornography on his phone twice while in the Commons chamber. Well, both of these by-elections taking place in 2 days' time, how will they be affected by the rail strikes we're seeing this week and all the other issues across the country? Well, joining me now is Nigel Nelson, political editor at The Sunday Mirror and The Sunday People. Nigel, thanks for joining us this morning. I suppose the big question when it comes to these by-elections, both arisen from particular local circumstances, is how much will the local play into how people vote versus the big national stories of this week?
Well, I think that the constituencies are very different. So in Wakefield, for instance, the average house price is 173,000. In Tiverton, we're talking about 275,000. So they are different kind of areas. Of course, local issues always do come into play, but I think this is very much a national kind of test. What Tory MPs have told me that they found on the doorstep, especially when they were campaigning in the local election campaign, is in seats which are traditional Tory seats but Liberal Democrat facing, their supporters are really, really angry about Partygate. So in Tiverton, I think you'll find that will play really big, which is why the Lib Dems may well be able to overturn a 24,000 Tory majority. Now, when we look at Wakefield, it's slightly different there. I think that people voted there for the Tories as a red wall seat because of their Brexiteers. But now there's the cost of living crisis, which affects people there particularly. And so with the Tories only defending a 3,300 majority, and polling is suggesting that Labour is now 20 points ahead, that's almost a shoo-in for the Labour candidate Simon Lightwood.
I wonder to what extent, therefore, these results are baked in. Does anyone seriously expect the Tories have a hope of winning either of these by-elections?
Well, I think the Tories have given up with Wakefield, that they're pretty certain they're going to lose that back to Labour. Things are very different down in Tiverton. I mean, if you find that the Tories lose a 24,000 majority, that is going to be a really big blow. And I think that's where people will start looking once again at Boris Johnson's leadership. The whole point about Boris Johnson was that a lot of Tory MPs held their noses and voted for him as leader, largely because he was a vote winner. Now, if he turns out to be a vote loser, they're going to start to rethink that decision.
A lot of people will be being disrupted today because of these strikes taking place right across the country. There's a big blame game going on in Westminster. The Tory party is calling them Labour's strikes. The Labour Party is saying it's up to the government to sort out a deal between the unions and, indeed, the rail companies. Who are people likely to believe in this battle of perception?
Well, I mean, the problem here is that Grant Shapps is the Transport Secretary. He's responsible for the rail network in the same way he's responsible for air travel, which is not going so well either. And yet he's abdicated all responsibility and says it's up to the employers to do the negotiating with the unions and not up to the government. I find that a bizarre kind of position to be in. The very least that Grant Shapps could be doing is actually talking to both sides, trying to sort out some kind of deal, and he seems not to want to do that. Now, there is the suggestion that rail strikes now become a real sort of wedge issue. And as a result of them, people will be more inclined in those two by-elections to vote Tory. I'm not sure that's true. You're absolutely right. There is a blame game going on with all sides. But the least you would expect the Secretary of State for Transport to do was roll up his sleeves, get involved and try and solve it.
It's interesting that the Labour Party haven't been more equivocal on where they stand on this. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is saying that he wishes these strikes weren't going ahead, but he can't bring himself to condemn them. And even the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy, have said that they support the strikers. Wes has even said that he would vote for the strike to go ahead were he a member of the RMT. Would Labour be in a better position if they were less in a muddle over this situation?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that Keir Starmer has very much been sitting on the fence over this one. I also think it's actually quite difficult for the Labour leader. I mean, on one hand, no one wants to see the nation disrupted in the way it is at the moment. On the other, Labour traditionally supports working people. So it has put him in a tricky position. This is not actually helped a lot by Mick Lynch of the RMT, who has not been absolutely clear about what the pay demand is. Now, we seem to be getting the idea that it's somewhere around 7% he wants. The train operators are offering 2% with another 1% on top of that, provided that there are redundancies. But he's not been absolutely clear about what he would actually settle for. My own feeling is that what you can't do is go for above inflationary rises, because that just stokes prices. But somewhere in the region of around 5%, where you're splitting the difference, would seem to be a kind of fair kind of settlement.
It's a really interesting one. I'm not sure that we're getting any closer to any sort of agreement between these two sides, and room for a week of disruption, possibly more, possibly spreading to other sectors. It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in our politics. But for now, Nigel Nelson, thank you so much for talking us through those issues, and particularly how they impact those by-elections this week. Now, there are 15 candidates standing in Wakefield, and stay with me here because we have to do this. They are Sir Archibald Stanton Earl Eaton from the official Monster Raving Loony Party, love them. Nadeem Ahmed for the Conservatives. Akef Akbar, who's independent, Paul Bickerdike from the Christian People's Alliance, Mick Dogson of the Freedom Alliance, Jada Franson, an independent, Jordan Gaskell for the UK Independence Party, and David Herden of the Yorkshire Party. There's also Therese Hurst from the English Democrats, Christopher Jones from the Northern Independence Party, Simon Lightwood for Labour, Jamie Needle from the Liberal Democrats, Ash Roth of the Green Party, Ashley Simon from Britain First, and Chris Walsh from Reform UK. And now, finally, fortunately, there are only 8 candidates standing in Tiverton and Honiton. Let's run through them. They're Jordan Donoghue-Morgan for the Heritage Party, Andy Fone for Reform UK, Richard Ford for the Liberal Democrats, Helen Herford for the Conservatives, Liz Pole for Labour, Frankie Ruffalo for the For Britain Movement, Bren Walker for UKIP, and Jill Westcott for the Green Party. There we go. What a marathon. Obligations anyway. The Prime Minister will hold crisis talks at this morning's Cabinet meeting in response to the worst rail strikes in 30 years. Talks, of course, collapsed yesterday afternoon after the RMT rejected an offer from rail bosses of a 3% pay rise. Millions of people across the country will have felt the impact of these strikes already this morning as the rush hour comes to a close. But the Prime Minister is expected to say any moment now ahead of Cabinet that the unions are harming the very people they're claiming to be helping. By going ahead with these rail strikes, they are driving away commuters who ultimately support the jobs of rail workers, whilst also impacting businesses and communities across the country. Meanwhile, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has this morning accused the RMT leader Mick Lynch of wanting to transform himself into one of those 1970s union barons, and that these strikes have been called under, quote, false pretences. So, how are these walkouts affecting the morning commute? Well, our reporters Paul Hawkins and Rachel Sweeney are out and about for us. Rachel, let's start with you. You're at Durham bus station. How's it going there?
Hello, good morning. Yes, well, I've been speaking to people who have chosen the bus today because the trains aren't running. As you'll know, a lot of people travel from County Durham to Newcastle and Gateshead to work. The train takes about 9 minutes, the bus takes much longer, even towards an hour. But I've found one commuter here, Matthew Goundry, who's actually just come back from holiday and was expecting to get the train to get himself home. And tell us what happened, Matthew.
So we've just got to the airport and then we've been told that the trains have been stopped working for the day. So we've had to get in a taxi, which has cost us £80 compared to what the train would have cost us. And now we've had to drag my friend out of bed to come and pick us up to get us home.
What's your reaction to strike action? I mean, £80 is a lot to pull out after a holiday and in a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, I think it's a bit out of nowhere, really, isn't it? I know it's a lot of people wanting to get paid, but I still think it's a bit over the top, if you ask me.
What do you think about the social media reaction? What have people been saying? There's no trains, you've got to get the bus, you've got to walk, cycle.
Well, I've not actually had a look on. I've not had much chance to have a look on. I've been on a plane for all morning, so I've not had much chance to look on Facebook or anything just yet.
How will you get home now then?
Like I said, I've got my friend, he's coming out of bed to come and get us, so he should be here any minute.
And how will you pay this £80 back?
I won't.
There you go. It's costing people a lot of money in taxis. But, you know, the bottom line is, in a cost of living crisis, people are taking on more hours. Some people are working multiple jobs. They've got to get to the city, and not everybody drives, so it's very difficult. I'll be keeping you up to date. I'll be on a picket line from 11 o'clock here in County Durham.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much for bringing us that view from County Durham. Always great to see what's going on up there. Now we're going across to Paul Hawkins, who's at London Bridge Station. Paul, what's it like there?
London Bridge Station is quiet. I'll be honest, Tom, we've been here all morning and the doors opened at 7 o'clock. There were some people waiting outside, but really it's been fairly quiet here this morning. Busy on the pavements on London Bridge, busy-ish on the buses, but it doesn't feel like there is... there's a tube strike in the capital, there's also the national rail strikes we've just been hearing about, and we know that in the past you see those scenes in London where people are trying to cram onto buses and they can't get on, there's loads of people spilling out to the road. It doesn't feel like that in London this morning. Yes, it's busier, but it does feel, and it is just anecdotal, but it feels like a lot of people are getting the message and they're staying at home where they can work from home. Bear in mind, I've just spoken to one care worker, just finished a night shift in Wood Green. It's taken her 2 hours on a bus to get here to London Bridge. She's then making an onward journey to South Norwood, but her train's been cancelled and she has to wait another 45 minutes. And she's, I asked her, does she support the rail strike? She said she does, although this is a little bit too much. So bear in mind there are a lot of people that are finishing night shifts as well, trying to make their way back home. This is what some of the people this morning have been telling us about how they feel about the strikes. How do you feel about the strikes going ahead? Do you think they should?
Well, I don't know. They know why they are going on strike, probably for a better pay or something. I can't just speak for them. I learned there's an inflation in the country now, so probably that's why they're asking for a pay increase. Maybe their salaries are not enough to sustain the family.
That's what they say. Do you think they have a point then? Do you think that they should have the right to strike?
I think they have a point.
Yeah.
They have a
So
point.
do you think it'll be busy or not, or what do you reckon?
No, it won't be busy, especially at the stations. It'll be hotels, people going to airports, people coming in not knowing there's strikes. So, yeah, it's going to be dead. It's dead now, so you can see it. We've been sitting here for 20 minutes or so, so there's nothing happening.
So cab drivers heading for the hotels, basically. That's where it's busiest. We've spoken to quite a few people this morning who stayed in hotels overnight and then have walked back to work this morning. So that's what cab drivers are doing. But people are just trying to get to work. Those that do have to be in the office, trying to get to work the best way they can. Mopeds, scooters, taxis, walking, running, whatever, trying to make their way into work this morning. This is the real acid test. This is the thing we don't know, is public opinion. Where will public opinion sit by the end of this week? And the longer it goes on, the more it will wear people down.
Really, really important point. Of course, this is not just strikes today, but 2 more days to follow and potentially copycats after that. Paul Hawkins, thank you so much for bringing us that news there from London Bridge Station. Well, now on to something a little bit different. World Press Freedom Day was marked last month, but today, Conservative MP Damian Collins will be honouring it in a Westminster Hall debate. And it seems this debate couldn't come at a more apt time. Controversy has arisen after a story that had been published in the Times newspaper alleging that Boris Johnson considered offering Carrie Johnson, then Carrie Simons, a top job in the Foreign Office. The job was never offered after advice was taken, but curiously, the story disappeared from the Times newspaper shortly after it had been published. Well, we'll start talking about that in a little second. But first, the Duke of Cambridge turns 40 today, and the future heir to the throne continues to use his status to highlight causes he cares about. Our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, has this.
Conservationist, father and future king. Prince William is Britain's most popular royal after his grandmother, the Queen. For an ancient institution with a motto of never complain, never explain, the Duke of Cambridge has been a pioneer in modernising the monarchy he will one day lead. Ian Pelham-Turner was one of the first photographers to take official pictures of the baby William in 1982. Royal rules dictated he only had minutes to capture the perfect shot and wasn't allowed to speak to parents Charles and Diana. The Princess of Wales was unaware her son's teething ring was blocking her face.
And I made a noise like I was dying. And Diana turned round and she knew I was breaking protocol, but I wasn't, because I wasn't actually speaking. As she moved the teething ring, William went to grab the teething ring, and in 1/60th of a second, that really made my career. I've been living off that picture for the past 40-odd years since.
The Duke of Cambridge has a long-standing passion for protecting wildlife, and one of his first royal patronages in 2005 was the conservation charity Tusk. Before the charity's existence, up to 100,000 elephants a year were killed by poachers in the illegal ivory trade. Charles Mayhew, MBE, is Tusk's co-founder and CEO. He's worked closely with Prince William and has travelled to Africa with him to help protect wildlife.
From the moment he became patron, we saw a significant rise in our revenue, but much more importantly than that, his ability to promote the work, not only of Tusk, but actually the wider conservation movement, and using his patronage of Tusk as a means to do that and to get some very sort of powerful messages across.
William is the future of the monarchy, but the future of the planet worries him. His new global prize for the environment was launched, the most ambitious and prestigious of its kind, designed to find 50 solutions to repair our planet over the next 10 years.
It's a hugely ambitious target, but I do think the positivity and that finding ways through this is better than saying, it's all doom and gloom, we're all going to, perish. I think we've got to harness our ingenuity and our ability to invent.
The prince's passion perhaps stems from his grandfather and father's work over the decades. Having a family of his own gives him the opportunity to inspire the next generation to look after the planet. But the Duke's main duty is supporting the Queen, and her mobility issues means William represents her at more engagements. Good practice for a monarch of the 21st century. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, thanks to Cameron for that. But back to press freedom. Let's bring in Sam Ashworth-Hayes, a journalist and political commentator, because we were talking about this story that appeared in the Times and then mysteriously disappeared. It was a story that suggested the Prime Minister mulled hiring his then-girlfriend, or mistress, one might say, to become his Chief of Staff at the Foreign Office. The appointment was never made, but I suppose what makes this a really interesting story is the fact that the story disappeared.
Yes, sorry, Tom, I'm losing you in my headphones for the moment there.
I'm sorry, Sam, I suppose what makes this story interesting is the fact that it's disappeared from the Times, more so than the actual substance of it.
Yeah, absolutely, and particularly interesting that it actually managed to go to print in an early edition and disappeared from subsequent ones. And obviously, since then, Number 10 has come out and said that they did intervene, they did talk to the Times and asked to remove it. Which is really quite astonishing, I think.
Why do you think this might have happened? Because we all have heard of this phenomenon called the Streisand effect, named after Barbara Streisand, who tried to have a picture removed from the internet back in the early 2000s. No one had really seen the picture, but as soon as she tried to get it removed, more and more people saw it. The idea that trying to censor something can actually blow it up into a bigger thing. This seems to me like a textbook example of that effect.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's particularly as well because this had actually been reported before. It was in, I think, one of Lord Ashcroft's books, which had been serialised by the Mail. So this was actually out there, and no one had really paid any attention to it. In much the same way that the Partygate photo, or reporting with Boris and the cake, had been reported at the time, and no one really paid any attention to it. There's always a risk that when one of these things get picked up again, that anything you do to try and sort of quash the story, it's the quashing itself makes it a much bigger deal than it would otherwise have been. And this just seems to be an absolute classic of the case, because now you have the journalist who wrote the thing writing for other outlets saying, why has my story been pulled? You have people reporting on it. I believe the Liberal Democrats are planning to ask questions about it in Parliament later. So it's just been blown up so much larger than it would otherwise have been.
In that respect, might we actually have more freedom of the press in this country than this story would imply. I mean, the very fact that this story was pulled from one newspaper, it has now been printed in a dozen others, because we have the plurality of media in this country and wonderful plurality of broadcast media, of print media, and indeed, at the moment, a free internet. Do we have journalistic freedom? Do we have freedom of the press in this country?
Yeah, I think we are incredibly fortunate to do what we do in Britain, because we do have freedoms that you don't have in other countries. As you say, the fact that this story can be sort of pulled from one paper and then run in so many others sort of illustrates that. But that's also not to say that we should be complacent about it. Obviously, I think they're going to be debating in Parliament today, press freedom in Britain. And I guess a couple of things to flag up here is that while the online safety bill, which is currently making its way through Westminster, does have carve-outs for journalism, it also does push platforms to suppress content, which isn't great for freedom of speech. And particularly as well, the overlap between ordinary citizens and journalists these days is much greater than it would otherwise have been in the past. And you just have to look at some of the excellent reporting being done from Ukraine to see that, where a lot of stories are sort of coming out through Twitter, through ordinary people on the ground there. And sort of the same sort of phenomenon does actually happen in Britain, where people break things online and get followed up by journalists. So anything that sort of suppresses that, I think, is obviously very bad. And the other thing, of course, as we're sort of dancing around here, is that British libel law is incredibly chilling for journalism, because even if you report a story which is true, you can back it up, you still have the fact that cases can be brought and sort of hang over your head for years on end, as we've seen quite recently with some very high-profile ones which just resolved. And of course, it's just absolutely financially ruinous if you lose those. So it's, we are very privileged to do what we do in a country which is so tolerant of it, but it's definitely not the sort of thing to be complacent about.
Well, really interesting points there. Sam Ashworth-Hayes, thanks so much for talking about that really important issue. Glad we could squeeze it into the programme there. Coming up, it's To The Point with Mercy and Nana, but first, here's the weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. A fine start out there once again. Cloudier weather has arrived into the north with a few showers expected today, but actually, for the vast majority, it's set fair over the next few days, with a ridge of high pressure across much of the UK, extending all the way from a large high in the mid-Atlantic. Any fronts that do arrive into the northwest will be weak affairs, and that's what we've seen essentially overnight. A weather front has brought cloudier conditions to Scotland and Northern Ireland. The far north of England sees that cloud arrive during the morning, but the rain has more or less fizzled out, so just a few spots of rain, mainly towards western hills and coasts, and some showers developing for eastern Scotland, perhaps the Pennines as well. But for the vast majority, by the afternoon, it's dry, it's bright, and it's increasingly warm and sunny, with temperatures reaching 25 Celsius in the south and the east of England, mid to high teens for the north of Scotland under the cloud, but central and eastern Scotland could see temperatures into the 20s still. Into the evening, it looks like the clear skies will continue across